That's great. I think I'm going to have a couple questions. Not everyone needs to answer these, but I think it's good to go through a few of the pertinent questions here that we didn't get to cover in previous comments. I see quite a few questions about AI literacy and understanding, so I might read one out that's worded particularly well. What does the panel think should be done to better educate individuals that fit into marginalized categories so that when decisions are made on how their data is used, collected, stored, that they can give the most poignant and relevant insights to a theoretical panel body who make the final decisions on deployment of these AI models in a wider society? Big question.
I mean, I think I'm at the Alan Turing Institute, and we've done also a lot of engagement and deliberation, and some that have been specifically geared towards amplifying the voices of historically marginalized communities or other vulnerable populations. And so I think that from the practitioner's perspective, what's most important is to take the time to ensure that people are being introduced into the details of the technology so they can understand and have a kind of reflective relationship to thinking critically about the consequences of the technology. So I'm just thinking we did a couple of deliberations in Bristol is an example where we spent a few days doing kind of background materials and teaching in statistical systems and whatnot. At the end of that, there's always a kind of some transformative effect where people feel as though they're able to kind of, regardless of who it is, they're able to give a kind of a more informed, more agentially empowered position when it comes to expressing an attitude about a technology. And so I think it's just important to do it responsibly and ensure that there's cognitive equity, that you're starting with language that isn't going to be exclusionary for those who haven't been raised up in certain vocabularies or languages. And then at the end of the day, it really is about, I think, empowering through engagement, regardless of what community you're engaging.
I may add to that. We did some kind of research, not enough yet, but that's still evolving about interviewing people. We're interviewing participants in some of these activities, and they kind of confirmed basically this learning process that was very, very important to them. So it is a kind of, in a way, a literacy also initiative to increase people's understanding, and our interviews with organizers of many of these events also showed the kind of sometimes the surprise even on the side of organizers that participants were actually then in the end able to engage on a very comparably thorough level and come up with some interesting recommendations in the end. So there is kind of a learning process definitely, which is very important.
Well, one of the most interesting initiatives I've definitely been involved with was a public deliberation on the National DNA Database. And with that, we essentially looked at the composition of a National DNA Database. We found that certain groups were very highly overrepresented. And we then created a deliberative mini-public that then mirrored the sample of a National DNA Database. And we introduced the National DNA Database, and we said, this is what it's about, how it's being used. And, actually just tested the question. So actually being really clear that the question itself needs to be framed and co-created, and then began this conversation about pitfalls, issues, areas, use cases, applications, and then, by the way, advice. What do you advise that the National DNA Database do about the way they design, the way they work with impacted communities, and that point about advice and actually responding to that advice rather than it sitting on a shelf somewhere. That's a really good model of participatory processing, not only being participatory, but also responding to the needs of the communities that are really impacted. And the challenge is, of course, that who owns the National DNA Database? Are they really willing to commission that and do what is required to respond? So, I mean, I'm hoping I'm speaking to some people who are working on data systems in the audience. I really urge you to think about that. Like, where can you reflect on your own power and your own positionality in this space and actually take a bit of a step back and say, actually, this is not up for me to determine, and I need to work with my community to determine the governance over it.
I'm going to end with this question because we are almost at time, but I think it's a good provocation to think about everything we've been talking about today. So reading out, it's regarding the notion of asking who gets to decide. Is the asking of this question a response to the implicit recognition that us, users, and the general public have already been left out of this decision-making process and will continue to be so?
Yes. But I think one thing that I think is really important that we take away from this as well is we're asking this question, we're talking and we're deliberating about this question. We are people who instinctively look for information, who look for knowledge. It is sometimes hard to recognize that that is not a universal trait, and something that we need to be very careful about is that we ensure that everybody is being, I wouldn't say incentivized, but is being brought into the conversation. And understanding that simply saying, you can come and tell me about stuff, and I will listen to all your views, is not enough. We need to understand the role of advocates, the role of figureheads in the communities that we want to deal with. We saw this in COVID. Different people, different sub-communities were responding very differently to requests, these kinds of requests, these kinds of information, these kinds of questions. And we want to make sure that when we're asking who gets to decide, we're not only listening to the people who are volunteering an opinion, but actually listening to everybody.
So I think there's a few things that I would say on this, but the main thing is about resourcing and support and guidance and actually investing in participatory approaches. So I don't know if anyone's seen The People versus Climate Change, which is a BBC documentary about climate and the large-scale resourcing and the national narrative that was then, put into that. So, in a way, if we can have that conversation about climate change, which is extremely complicated, involves us all, and have that at national level sponsored by Parliament, why can't we have that very same conversation about AI, which is, again, extremely complicated, involves us all, and certainly has strong social, political, democratic implication. It's surely worthy of consideration. And so I think I would want us to look beyond we should have some citizen juries here and there, the incrementalism, and say, actually the model here, it's already worked, it's worked in relation to one area, why couldn't it work for something else? And well, by the way, we won't want the incrementalism alongside that, but let's think big and let's be ambitious.
And so I would say, maybe building on that, as an answer to the question, yes, hopefully no. I mean, yes, these debates reflect the fact that we and others, and in particular, have been left out of many of these discussions and decisions. And some of these kind of initiatives that we see, even up to government level, reflect that. Will that be the case in the future? Hopefully not. Hopefully there will be more of a broader debate in that area as you outlined, and more engagement. That's, I guess, one of the hopes for the future.
So just, it's been a very cautionary conversation. So I think I'll finish on a cautionary note, which is that I think as we're going through the contemporary world that we live in, where there's ever more datafication, ever more digitization, the presence of these systems are becoming, it's becoming more prevalent in broader cyber physical systems. So there's more sensors, there's more actuators in the world, more smartified devices. We're moving into a world where the pervasiveness of these technologies will be almost unavoidable. And when we live in a world like that, there's a real sort of hazard of what's called technological determinism. The feeling that the technology will happen come what may. It's everywhere. It will continue to be everywhere. It will continue to spread regardless of human choices. And I think that's a real threat. It's a real fallacy. The question of who decides always has to be a question that's decided by humans, by us. And I guess I just finish with one of my favorite quotes, the dying words of Henri de Saint-Simon, who said, "The future belongs to us. The future will always belong to us. We decide on the future, nothing else."
Fabulous. That was a great thought to end on. We are at time. I want to thank you, the audience, for coming and spending your Friday night chatting to us. I want to thank all of the speakers and Ian for presenting their thoughts and perspectives. If you'd like to learn more about our work at the Civic Data Cooperative that have been casually referenced a couple times here, you can visit us at civicdatacooperative.com. We have a lot of ongoing projects, but I want to give a big shout out to the people involved in helping us plan this. Capacity, which is a local Liverpool organization that does amazing projects and work in the community. The Heseltine Institute, thank you to Emma and to Sue for helping us organize. And I want to finish by saying a big thank you to Kaya Doherty Kane for all the time she spent in, and to Chantal Murphy. And just finish by saying we hope this is not the last of our events, and have a look out on our social media. And I always like to say the same thing, which is that I don't really care what people think about AI. I just care that what they think matters. Let's end there. Thank you.